Hello and welcome. You are watching Business Plus here on News 9 Live. I am Krishna Kumar. Our top story, and it is the Indian economy which continues to throw up some very good surprises. It posted an impressive 7.8% growth in GDP for the last quarter of the last financial year, and that has pushed up the entire financial year's growth, GDP growth, to a whopping 8.2%. Official data has revealed a slight dip from the 8.6% expansion in the previous quarter of the last financial year, but has shown significant progress from the 6.2% growth in the same period in the last financial year. Data coming in from the National Statistical Office at NSO for the full financial year 2023-24. India's GDP soared by 8.2%, outpacing by a mile the 7% growth it put up in the year 2022-23. The NSO, bear in mind, had anticipated a 7.7% growth for financial year 24 in its second advance estimate, making this outcome all the more noteworthy. For Q4, or the fourth quarter of financial year 2024, GDP growth data was released, and various polls had expected that the Indian economy growth would have slowed to an annual 6.7% in the last quarter. The Indian economy had unexpectedly grown at 8.4% in the third quarter of FY24. Economists were of the view that this GDP growth rate was unlikely to continue into the fourth quarter as well. Meanwhile, the Reserve Bank of India, in its annual report, had stated that the Indian economy is expected to grow at 7% in the current financial year, that is financial year 2024-25. Bear in mind, India is the world's fastest growing major economy and currently holds the tag of being the world's fifth largest economy. And in the coming years, it's expected to become the world's third largest economy after only the US and China. In contrast, China, our major economic rival, recorded just a 5.3% growth in the first quarter of 2024. We have my colleague Karthik Malhotra now joining us for more. Karthik, we were celebrating with an RBI annual report which said that third consecutive year, India's economy, India's GDP is growing at 7% or above. Looks like the celebrations need to be bigger. What a surprise this has been.
Absolutely, Krishna, and I think the numbers could not have come actually at a more opportune time for the ruling BJP-led NDA government, because we still have one phase of elections to go tomorrow, and any good report card coming is always good for the voters. So I think overall, when you're looking at the numbers, anything in excess of 8% is not something that we had expected. In fact, even the revised estimates that had come during the year suggested that we will maybe just about barely touch 8% or so. But for the full year, growth coming in at 8.2% is obviously, not something which was expected, and something which is much better than what people had hoped for. Now, the only point is that we know that the Ministry of Statistics and Plan Implementation keeps tweaking these numbers, and the revised estimates keep coming. So, at least for now, yes, there is reason to celebrate that we have grown the whole year at 8.2%. But this could very well change as we move along. If you remember, for the previous quarter as well, the Q3 of FY24, the initial numbers reported were about 8.4%, but that increased to 8.6%, which again has been instrumental in shifting the overall burden of GDP growth to the higher side. So overall, we don't know whether these numbers eventually are going to change for the better or the worse. So revised estimates should not be ruled out. But I think you mentioned China, and it's a good note to sort of bring into this conversation that when one of the bigger economies and a bigger nation which is really big on manufacturing is growing at just over 5%, then India growing at a good 3 percentage points higher than that is obviously good news for India as a whole and for trade in India. Now, for our viewers, I just want to break it up. How is GDP really calculated? And I think we'll really see the larger India story in that. So the simplest formula of GDP is that GDP is equal to C plus G plus I plus X minus M, which is the consumption which happens in the country, the total spending that the government does, all the infrastructure that the government builds, which is also called investment. So government as well as private infrastructure that gets deployed, which is long-term in nature, is I, and then the net imports or the net exports, as the case may be. On consumption, you have the auto sales data for the whole year. India has sold and bought rather 40 lakh cars. So the consumption story is definitely looking good. Even though the FMCG side, especially on the rural India front, has not really kicked up the way it should have. But overall consumption is looking good. Government spending, we know all the schemes that the government has implemented, launched, all the taxpayers' money which has been spent on, on developing, the rural part of the population is something which goes into the GDP formula. And then investments, the roads, the highways, the ports, the airports, all the government heavy lifting which is done on infrastructure development goes into the investment component. And of course, India has been lucky and smart that the oil import bill, which have been much higher, has actually turned out to be lower than expected because of the cheap Russian oil that India has imported. So overall, all components are in the green for India, and that is reflecting in the numbers.
Lucky and smart as far as our economy is concerned. Karthik Malhotra there joining us with the latest on the GDP numbers. An extremely happy surprise, over 8% GDP growth. Away from that, to the Reserve Bank of India, which has relocated around 100 tons of gold from the United Kingdom to its domestic vaults, marking the first significant transfer since the year 1991. This move addresses logistical and storage diversity concerns with plans to relocate more gold soon. Why has India's central bank decided to move such massive quantities of the yellow metal after nearly 3.5 decades? And what will be its economic impact? My colleague Suyash Maheshwari tells us more.
Reserve Bank of India is bringing 100 tons or 1 lakh kilograms of gold from the UK back to India. That's about 1/8 of India's total gold reserves as of March end. Now, how much is 1 lakh kgs of gold, you may ask? Well, that's equal to the weight of about 20 elephants put together. That's the amount of gold that India is looking to bring back. Now, RBI's decision is a fiscally prudent one. For one, it bolsters India's national reserves, and two, RBI saves on a hefty storage fees paid to the Bank of England. But why was so much gold stashed in the UK in the first place? Let's go back in time. In 1991, India faced a major financial crisis with very little money left to pay for imports like oil and essential goods. This was called a balance of payment crisis, which eventually led to independent India's first economic reforms by the way of liberalization in 1991. The high debt and the Gulf War had worsened India's already precarious situation. Now, to avoid running out of money completely, the RBI took a bold step. RBI pledged 46.91 tons of gold to the Bank of England, physically shipping gold from India to UK to secure the much needed financial assistance by the way of an IMF loan amounting to about $2.2 billion back then. Now, this helped India buy essential items and avoid an economic collapse. The economic reforms that followed reduced government's control, previously called the License Raj, and encouraged foreign investments by coming back in. The gold pledge was crucial, showing the world India's commitment to stability and setting the stage for future growth. But why the UK? For many central banks, the Bank of India has traditionally served as a secure repository, and India is no exception, with some of its gold reserves stored in London since before independence. Until now, more than half of RBI's gold reserves were kept overseas with the Bank of England and with the Bank of International Settlements, while a third was stored domestically. Now, according to experts, the ghar wapasi of gold was done for both logistical as well as storage diversification purpose. This suggests that a comparable amount of gold may be entering the nation once more in the upcoming months. Now, let's get to the question at hand. How will RBI pull this off, and what are the benefits? Now, given the security and logistical concerns, moving such a heavy quantity of a precious metal like gold required months of planning and precise execution. It demanded close coordination between the Finance Ministry, the RBI, and various other government departments, including local authorities. Initially, RBI obtained a custom duty exemption to bring the metal back into the country, with the central government foregoing revenue on this sovereign asset. However, there was an exemption from integrated GST, which applies to imports since this tax is shared with the states. Transporting large quantities of gold required a special aircraft and comprehensive security arrangements. This move will also enable the RBI to save on some storage costs paid to the Bank of England, although these are not substantial. In summary, bringing back gold strengthens India's reserves and reflects the RBI's proactive approach in managing national assets efficiently.
Now, even as India brings back all its gold, it is gearing up for a very difficult battle. The opponent here is the European Union, and the mediator, the World Trade Organization or WTO, no friend of India either. The EU wants to attack India's metal and mineral exports to Europe with a carbon tax. India has put its foot down, saying no way. This is the story of a new tax called Carbon Border Adjusted Mechanism or CBAM that it intends to slap on India starting the 1st of January 2026. Now, CBAM will ensure that non-EU producers like those in India must report their emissions in producing key metals like iron, steel, aluminium, etc., as well as fertilizers and cement. Under the new mechanism, EU importers will have to buy CBAM certificates to account for India's emissions, which in effect translates to a hefty tax of up to 35%. Let's get this straight. This is not just another tax. It's a protectionist policy for the European Union to safeguard its own economy at the cost of developing challengers like India that are more cost efficient and hence preferred suppliers. It's a unilateral move by the EU to hit India's exports and hurt Indian industries under the garb of carbon emissions. For context, in the year 2023 alone, India exported $7.4 billion worth of iron, steel and aluminium products to the EU. $7.4 billion is as much as 3/4 of India's total current account deficit that stands at $10.5 billion a quarter. Let's not forget who polluted the world with industrialization and made their own economies richer while India was still reeling under the British rule. And when it's India's time to rise, the West gets reminded of the environment. It's hypocrisy at its worst. India is not taking this lying down. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal had assured the industry players last year that India will take up the fight at WTO and find a solution that collects the carbon tax in India for India to deploy it back into its net carbon neutral by 2070 mission. WTO has historically complained about India's subsidies to the farm sector. So finding a friend in WTO will indeed be a diplomatic battle as much as an economic one. If India doesn't win this battle, it sets a wrong precedent for other such acts in the making. The United States of America has its Inflation Reduction Act to boost green technology industries. And the UK plans to implement its own version of the CBAM by the year 2027. These pose a major threat to the whole developing world bloc where India is a significant player. The good news is that India may not be alone in this good fight. There's talk of developing countries getting together to respond collectively. So could this be the beginning of a new coalition in global trade politics? We'll have to wait to get answers to that. Away from that, India's national capital, New Delhi, is facing a severe crisis on two fronts. A scorching heat wave with temperatures reaching 50 degrees Celsius and above, and along with it, a critical water shortage. Government water tankers, which can take up to 20 days to arrive, are insufficient for neighborhoods with 4,000 to 5,000 people. Private tankers, costing 2,000 rupees each, are unaffordable for many, leaving the community in a desperate situation. My colleague Karthik Malhotra explains the water crisis in Delhi. Take a look.
India's capital, New Delhi, is battling a two-front war. On one side, there's a heat wave with mercury touching 50 degrees Celsius, and on the other, a water crisis that's leaving residents high and dry. The heart of Lutyens' Delhi, Chanakyapuri Sanjay camp is among the worst hit, as is Geeta Colony in East Delhi. As taps run dry, Delhi residents are losing their cool. They say if they call for a government water tanker, it takes as much as 20 days to arrive. Even when a government tanker does arrive, it's nearly not enough to cater to a neighborhood of 4,000 to 5,000 people. And a private water tanker costs 2,000 rupees. Residents are feeling the heat even more since the government has already cut down fresh water supply from twice a day to just once at 11 a.m. every day. The crisis is real, and so is the politics behind it, where, as always, it's the citizen who pays the price. Aam Aadmi Party's MLA Atishi is putting the blame on Haryana for not releasing enough water into the capital, even as Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal has made an appeal to the centre to coax neighbouring Haryana and Uttar Pradesh to release more water into Delhi. Now, landlocked Delhi relies heavily on water from the Yamuna. The Hathni Kund barrage in Haryana releases Yamuna water to Delhi's Wazirabad, and then that gets distributed to water treatment plants. Where are these water treatment plants? One is in Wazirabad itself. There's one more in Chandrawal, and finally a third one in Okhla, from where water is then distributed to the whole city. While the politics over water supply ensue, Delhi government is putting into motion its own action plan to handle the situation. First up, a war room in Delhi Jal Board is getting set up under an IAS officer to monitor the movement of water tankers for areas where taps are running dry. For residents, there's a central helpline number. Yes, anytime you're running short of water, 1916 is the number to call to make requests for water tankers to arrive. Then, every water zone in Delhi, and there are 11 of these. In each of these 11 centers, government officials will be stationed from the 5th of June to activate quick response teams to areas facing a water shortage. 200 enforcement teams are also being formed to ensure that water wastage is nipped in the bud. This comes as the Delhi government has already imposed strict rules on the use of potable water. For one, there's a complete ban on car washing centers that use piped water. No construction site in the city is to use potable water, and if found in violation, the building will be sealed. Complete ban on residents also for using piped water to wash their own cars. A fine of 2,000 rupees in case of violation, and repeat violators will be fined 500 rupees for each violation. So is the case for overflowing water tanks. Now, as water wars heat up in the capital that's already burning under a scorching summer, will the residents finally find any relief, or is this yet another knee-jerk reaction to an ill-planned, mismanaged mess that could have been avoided with stronger political will?
Talking about water and the heat, how hot is too hot to handle? If you've stepped outside lately, you're probably asking yourself this question. With India in the grip of a severe heat wave, it's becoming nearly impossible to get any work done outside. But have you ever wondered how we measure humidity, or why it makes the heat feel even worse? Humidity is recorded using three key temperatures: dry bulb, wet bulb, and dew point. These measurements help determine the state of humid air. Now, why does this matter? With just two of these values, experts can figure out the water vapor content in the air, as well as help us understand why we're sweating so much and why the heat feels so intense. With such a risk staring at millions of workers without air-conditioned workspaces, we need to wrap our heads around wet bulb heat as a concept. In simple terms, it is the lowest temperature that can be reached by evaporating water into the air at a constant pressure. It's measured by covering a thermometer bulb with a wet cloth and letting the water evaporate, which cools the thermometer. This temperature helps measure humidity and indicates how much water can evaporate into thin air, impacting comfort, agriculture, and weather patterns. So why does the wet bulb temperature matter? The wet bulb temperature directly affects our body's ability to cool down through sweating. When the wet bulb temperature is low, sweat evaporates easily, cooling us down. However, as it increases, higher moisture levels in the air make it harder for sweat to evaporate. This can lead to serious health issues like heat exhaustion or heat stroke if we're exposed to high wet bulb temperatures for too long. And most importantly, we should remember that when the wet bulb temperature reaches 35 degrees Celsius, our natural cooling system hits its limit. At this temperature, even the healthiest individuals with an unlimited water supply can only survive for a few hours before succumbing to the heat. Therefore, the critical threshold for human survival in wet bulb temperatures is 35 degrees Celsius. Current trends suggest that much of our population could be vulnerable to dangerous wet bulb heat by mid-century. Additionally, the energy required to keep people safe and cool could be enormous, creating a vicious cycle if not managed properly. Achieving carbon neutrality by the year 2070 while adopting clean tech options will be challenging. So the next time you're sweating buckets just by standing outside, remember, it's not just the heat, it's the humidity too. And the big question that remains is, can we afford to wait and see what happens? Well, the risks are just too severe to ignore. Away from that, to the debate in India's auto sector, which is heating up. What happens to internal combustion engines, or ICE, if the government wants to push for electric mobility? Could India's solution then be flex fuels? My colleague Amit Ranjan tells us more.
On 29th August last year, India became the first country in the world to introduce an electric flex fuel vehicle. This is the world's very first Bharat Stage 6 compliant hybrid ethanol-powered Toyota Innova. It's a 100% ethanol fuel variant. This new flex fuel Innova is powered by a hybrid powertrain that combines a petrol engine with an electric motor. The 2.0-litre 4-cylinder petrol engine has a fuel efficiency of 23.24 kilometers per litre. Compare this to a regular petrol-powered Innova. The mileage is between just 7 kilometers to 11 kilometers per litre. The higher mileage flex fuel Innova uses a petrol blend that uses ethanol extracted from sugarcane, and it costs 30% lesser than the regular petrol. So India's penchant for kitna deti hai gets answered twice over. Since this is a hybrid, it also generates 40% electricity that goes back into powering the engine and reducing the burning of fuel. So in effect, the hybrid also subsidizes the cost of ethanol petrol. The Toyota Innova serves as a good case study for the Government of India to promote fossil fuels in meeting India's energy demand as well as reducing the import bill. Biofuels can significantly reduce petroleum imports. For context, India spent a whopping $12.3 billion on crude imports in April alone. So how do flexi-fuel vehicles actually work? Flexi-fuel vehicles are modified vehicles capable of operating entirely on gasoline or any blend of gasoline and ethanol. E85 is the official name for the flexi-fuel in use. It has 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline or other hydrocarbons by volume. They have a conventional internal combustion engine similar to that existing in petrol and diesel cars, except for their ethanol-compatible fuel systems. They display improved acceleration performance as well when operating on higher ethanol blends. India also has a target of electrification of its fleet. We want to turn 30% of all our cars electric by 2030. Considering India sells only 2.3% electric vehicles right now, it is going to be an uphill drive. But the larger question that looms is, how environmentally sustainable is electric mobility when the power it sucks to charge the battery comes from thermal, coal-based power plants, and the minerals extracted from earth that go into battery manufacturing again come at an environmental cost. So is flexi-fuel the answer to India's sustainability challenges? If Nitin Gadkari has his way, then yes. But is the Indian auto industry ready for a massive technological shift? Just as yet.
And with that, it's a wrap here on this edition of Business Plus. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishna Kumar signing off.
I don't think anybody has isolated Ajit Dada Pawar. Ajit Dada has isolated himself.
That led to a lot of bad blood between the ruling partners.
It is not true. You know it very well, who these elements are, who these individuals are.